Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Financial Advisors Want to Know podcast. I'm Catherine Tindall, and today I have with me Scott Rusnak again. This is our second episode together. He had such a good time, he wanted to come back again. And I wanted him to come back again because I'm a big fan of EOS, the Traction Entrepreneur Operating System. It's something that we're implementing in our practice. A lot of the practices that I enjoy working with the best use this system too, so it works. So Scott, if you're not aware of who he is, you can check out that other episode we did, but he is an expert EOS implementer. He's an executive coach. I connected with him through another financial advisors podcast who he had successfully worked with. He's co-founded and exited several businesses. And he's got over 30 years of experience with this, but his experience will speak for itself when you hear the advice that he gives. So thanks for joining me again today, Scott.
Catherine, it's my absolute pleasure. I've got to ask you, what is the pre-Thanksgiving temperature in your neck of the woods today?
Oh, well, I'm actually in California right now. So I feel like I'm cheating. I'm usually in New Hampshire, but it's about 50 degrees and it's raining out here.
Well, I'm in Coronado in San Diego. My surfboard is very lonely beside me because the surf's not so good today.
No, well, that's a good complaint to have, though, compared to what some people have got going on. But yeah, no, it's funny how like being on different sides of the state, because I'm up north, like really will, it's like it's different country up here. But so we're recording this in November, and I think I'm in full. This is end of year tax planning mode for me in the practice, right? And I think it's a good time too for people to be, for a lot of practices to be thinking about their annual planning. I know it's something that we tend to do in the autumn, and a lot of the advisors that I work with do this in the autumn too. But so where would you recommend people start when it comes to the annual planning process, and what's recommended in the EOS system?
Well, so here's the thing. Whenever we start with a new client, we talk about healthy and smart. Mm-hmm. Most people come in as a client, hey, can you coach us? We want to get smarter. We want to become more effective. And to set your core target, your North Star, going, hey, in 10 years, we want to hit this certain measurable, that's kind of easy. That's table stakes. And then you back it up and say, well, here's where we want to be in 3 short years from now. And you look at it, well, what do we want to look like at the end of 2025? That stuff isn't as hard as the healthy part of healthy and smart. Mm-hmm. So healthy, open, honest teams have the foundation of really digging into one of my favorite business books ever, written by Patrick Lencioni, called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Mm-hmm. So I urge everyone listening and watching this podcast to download or listen to that book, read that book, because Lencioni in his brilliance basically says teams that are not functional, they're completely dysfunctional, don't have the right kind of trust. We call that vulnerability-based trust. So there's a number of exercises at the back of this book, and I apologize for really coaching hard in this podcast, but
that's what I'm looking for. I'm taking this advice to heart myself, so go for it, Scott.
Good. And in our setup, I said I was going to be coach heavy today. So number one, you've got to have a team that trusts one another, but it's got to be based on vulnerability-based trust. We've all got warts, we've all got wrinkles, we're getting old. Come on, nobody's perfect. And at the back of Lencioni's book, and yes, I do pick up that book for all of my annual planning sessions. I read from the back of the book. We talk about teams that lack trust and that teams that really lean into that vulnerability-based trust. Mm-hmm. And there's a way to rank that team after you ask, or rank the team after you ask those questions. Sort of a sample of 1 to 5 and then a 5 and above. And then with your facilitator or your coach or whomever is doing it, you then take it up a notch and say, okay, conflict. Teams that are afraid of conflict are completely dysfunctional. And there's the right kind of conflict. So again, there's a number of questions at the back of the book. You read through those questions and you have the team evaluate the leadership team. How are we at a scale of 1 to 10? So on trust, on conflict, same thing happens with commitment. Same thing happens with accountability, and then results. And some people that are watching this podcast might say, well, this is a 10-minute exercise. We can get through this in no time. Maybe we'll fill it out in advance. Well, the healthy and the smart part is to do it in a room, take 90 minutes to 2 hours out of your annual planning session and really dig deep into each one of those questions and the little subtleties. Because as people are reflecting on their grade, you'll start to see body language. They'll talk about incidents, they'll share stories, and that will allow you to have a greater degree of healthy conflict and the right kind of trust in the room. So there's a fire hose for you, but that's got to be the foundation of day one.
Yeah, and I love the way that you're putting that, just because I've noticed from my perspective, when you're a very execution-oriented leader, you want to treat a lot of these tasks just like, okay, well, this is a to-do list. Like, let's get through the list. Like, let's get this done. And in reality, it's not a process like that. It's an intuitive process. Like you have to let those pieces stew, and like you said, take time away, get away from your environment, get everybody actually in a room together, like turn off the Slack, turn off the screens, because it's not a process where it's, we're going to take 10 minutes, get through this. All right, check, done, next thing. Like it's not that kind of a vibe, which I appreciate. And it can be tempting to want to pigeonhole planning into that, which is something I have a temptation to. But so when you do this process with the teams, what are some of the common, I liked that you drew out the point of the teams that don't have conflict or dysfunctional. What are some of the common, pitfalls that maybe people might not be expecting on the leadership side? Like that was actually a lesson that I learned pretty early on. Was I had certain people on my team where when they were really hesitant to bring up problems because they didn't want to seem like they were complaining, or seem like they were complaining about other people on the team. But in reality, it was, bad behavior was perpetuating. So I'm interested to hear some of the things you've experienced in doing these with people.
Yeah. So two things came to mind. Set the stage as well. This is off-site, this annual planning session. It is not in Catherine's office down the street. It is off-site. So the team needs to make an effort. I'm not saying you need to fly to Mexico City. I'd advise against crossing borders, but you get about half an hour to an hour away from your office. You stay there, you're off-site, you're digging in. And that can bubble up some things as well of like, oh, people can be a little on edge. But I tell them if they go back to your core values, and one of my big core values is do the right thing. And the next is do what you say, and then be humbly confident. Hey, as a leadership team, we do the right thing, and we raise these things to the surface, these issues. And when people show up a session early on and they're like, oh, we don't have any issues, I'll just say, you're mailing it in. And I think we need to take a break right now. We're going to go for a walk.
Yeah.
So I just help them rephrase what's going through their mind. So they've got to bring those 1 to hopefully not more than 10 big issues to the table, and we dig in.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess when you're working with advisors or, people on the professional services side, where the work is so personal. A lot of the times, like, we don't manufacture widgets, and people's personalities and ability to deal with the clients, and a lot of soft skills involved, so much. What are some of the problems that maybe you see like recur typically, or, communication breakdowns that you tend to see in teams like that?
Yeah. So you're in the world of tax. A lot of the people listening to this or watching this are financial advisors, or they own their own firm. And I let them know early on in the process, you're actually not in a tax business, Catherine. Just a newsflash.
Yeah.
You're not a financial advisor. You're actually in the human being world, and we're just a bunch of people. That's your product, actually, and your service is tax. So that's the stumbling block, is people need to get out of their own way and realize they're in the people business.
Yes, that is really true.
Leadership teams are able to take their foot off the gas, no ego, and be like, that's right, Catherine, you and I are just a bunch of human beings trying to do our best. That just takes the facade away. It just strips everything away, and it just settles the room down, and everything's on the table.
Yeah, that's great. So what's kind of the next sequence in the cadence that you recommend people look at?
Yeah. So I'll go straight to the session. So you check in, you put a little meat on the bone, you review the year, you talk about where we want to be in 10 years. Is that still accurate? 3, and a little bit of meat on the bone on 1 year. Then you go into that 5 dysfunctions exercise. And then I take it up one more notch. And Mr. Lincioni will sell a lot of books because of EOS, but we love him. The next book is The Ideal Team Player. And have people watch his TED Talk before that. It's about being hungry, humble, and smart. So when we're done that, we're typically halfway through the day and we take a couple hours. We go do something fun together, something a little bit odd and strange. We have a dinner that night. And then the next day we hit the ground running. It's almost like a regular EOS quarterly. We go review where we're at, what are our measurables, where our rocks going to be, reset the scorecard, talk about accountability chart, our values. And then at that point, people are duly exhausted by the end of day 2. And we just make sure that every quarter and every week they're checking in their level 10s, but every quarterly meeting, they're staying focused on all the good work we did at the annual, because that's the baseline for the rest of the year.
Yeah, that's great. And when you, like, I guess for people who are not as familiar with EOS, like what are some of the differences between on the annual planning versus the quarterly planning, things that are maybe just unique to the annual planning side of things? Just a slight interruption in this conversation. I wanted to bring to your attention 2 things that are important for you to know. So we're always at the mercy of social media algorithms. So if you can subscribe to the show, that would mean a lot to me. Even more to me if you can leave a rating and let me know what you think about it. But we have a new newsletter that's coming out. It's going to be very active in 2025. That is specifically around tax issues that I'm seeing advisors face in their own practices, changes in legislations, and the pieces that I think are critically important for you to stay ahead of as an advisor with the new administration. So nearby, wherever you're interacting with this, will be the link of how to sign up for our newsletter. Also nearby will be the link to my LinkedIn, which is the best way to get in touch with me, learn more about what we're doing for advisors in the tax strategy and compliance work that we do, and also to get access to the various tools and interviews and things that I do, specifically designed to help you improve your practice, improve your own tax situation, etc. So let's get back to the episode, and thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, so annual planning is 2 days offsite. Quarterly is typically 1 day, and quarterly is more about how are we going to chop wood? Like, let's look at the last quarter. How did we do? How are we going to reset that? So we pop our head up, kind of look around and say, okay, how are we going to reset so we can hit that 1 year goal, that 1 year target? So a quarterly is much more focused on looking back 90 days and then moving ahead the next 90 days. And when we set the stage with all of our teams, we talk about the 5 leadership abilities. And one of them is predicting. And predicting, we say you've got to predict long-term, which is just rocks, because you've already set your 1, your 3, and your 10, and then you predict short-term with your scorecard. So quarterly is more about that rocks and scorecard and teaching EOS tools. The annual is much more about that team health and making sure we're on the same page.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Do you have any specific scenarios, not like the people's names or anything, but just scenarios that might help advisors kind of jog their mind for, different solutions that you found with some of these team dysfunctions that maybe crop up frequently on the annual planning side?
Yeah. I find that, let's say it's a team of 5, and I'm going to use an actual team. I'm not going to say any names, but they brought someone in from the corporate world to run a specific department. This person, they come in, and EOS is very entrepreneurial, and I respect the corporate process and whatnot, but this person is always saying, oh yes, of course. I make sure that we check in, they realize it's real and raw, because sometimes they'll sit back and they'll have a certain presence of body language of, okay, we've got this.
Yeah.
And you can tell they're mailing it in.
Yeah.
And so I would advise getting a facilitator, a third-party coach. It doesn't need to be an EOS coach, but somebody in that room that can call it out, because it might be uncomfortable for Catherine or Scott in his own business to call that person out. But when you've got a coach that you can fire or have them push you a little bit harder, it becomes so much easier to get to the source of truth and point things out.
Yeah, no, that is such a good point. And it's funny, like there's other certain elements in the business, like something that I really like. I have an executive assistant who I love. And one of the things that I've loved about that relationship is it's sometimes being one step away from the action allows you to have a non-emotional response to things. Um,
Yeah.
and I've found, like, especially when doing planning things or talking about team issues or things like that point that you make of, if it's an external person who's calling out that one team member, you're not having to be the one that's creating the bad blood, even though, you're noticing, you don't have to be the bad cop, kind of a thing. Are there particular things that you've noticed maybe in teams that are going through, I think for a lot of advisors, especially when they start out solo, you're spinning so many plates, you're slowly professionalizing everything in the business. Everything it's like you're going from, like a firefighter in California just dropped in the middle of the fire to you're working your way through it. And, for teams that are, for advisors who aren't used to running big teams, or for advisors who are past those teenage years, they've got a couple people working for them, but kind of working through those teenage problems of working with a team.
Mhm.
What are some things that you've noticed in the process of work, like you said, like the team of 5,
Yeah.
with those grades of businesses, some of the recurring problems that maybe come up, or, hope for the advisors of, is this going to be like this when I'm a team of 15 or when I'm a team of 20, like, is it going to be this much chaos still? But, what are some thoughts do you have for people that are in that phase of life in the business?
Great question. I'm going to get specific, and I'm going to name a firm name because I started with a firm called Asset Preservation Strategies in San Diego about
Mm-hmm.
5 years ago.
Yep.
There were 3 people on the leadership team. Like, oh, well, I don't think we're big enough for this. I don't know what we should do. And I told them, you know what? That means you're more efficient. Bill Gates
Yeah.
said, hey, find me 6 great engineers and we can outperform 100. So let's take the 3 of us and do this the right way.
Mm-hmm.
We've done day and a half annual planning sessions and 1 day annual planning sessions, but they're such an incredibly healthy team that we still follow the agenda. We're just quicker. And it just allows us to get that work done. So put in the exact reps that somebody that might be a lot bigger than you is doing, and just understand that someone like Asset Preservation Strategies with 3 people on a leadership team and about 5 employees follow it, and they're just crushing it. Talk about a healthy and smart team.
Yeah, no, and that makes a lot of sense. Like, I think, something that I look on early on when I work with these advisor clients and I see certain behaviors, one of the things that I see, really early on in the planning is the ones where, when they're small, but they're thinking about when they're going to be big, and like, how do we build these cadences now? They're not quite the bottlenecks in the business, but like, we don't want to be walking into the fires. Like, we don't want to be walking into the bottlenecks. Like, we want to have things structured. Do you have any advice for people who are maybe solo practitioners who have a goal to, they have a goal to grow, but I think
Mhm.
for a lot of people who are solo, the fear is, if I don't have things organized enough on my side, like, am I going to scale a mess? Like, am I just throwing bodies at problems rather than me becoming more efficient as a solo practitioner?
Yeah.
Maybe what's some feedback that you have for people that are maybe don't have a team, but still need to do annual planning for themselves?
Yeah. So if it's just one person, I urge them to find a facilitator and walk through it. Again, it doesn't need to be an EOS coach. Find someone, because it's just like going to a gym. If it's, I've got to go see my trainer, the appointment's at 1 to 3, set the time and do it and commit. So find 4 or 5 hours and block off that day. Get away from the office, turn off all the noise, print out the agenda, and go back to all the things you want to accomplish, and have that coach or facilitator or whomever it may be poke holes in it, but guide you along so you do it the right way.
Yeah, no, that's great. So for people who are interested in learning more about the work that you do, Scott, and maybe where you'd like to, I know you mentioned the couple of books, which we'll put the links below, but for
Mhm.
people who are interested in learning more about your work, or recommendations you have for where people should go for more resources, what's your recommendation there?
If they want to come to my website, I'll point them in the right direction. It's scottrusnak.com. It's pretty tricky. I'd be more than happy. And at our last podcast, I pointed 3 people in the right direction, and they're super happy. So I see this podcast as a help first. Let's help as many people as we can, and hopefully point them in the right direction.
Yeah, awesome. I love it. Well, thanks for coming on, Scott. And for people listening, I'm going to post wherever you're encountering this in the ether that is the internet. I'll post Scott's website and then some of the references he specifically named in the show for you to be able to check those out. Get the books, get the books, get the books, do the books, take the time, make it happen. Because if you don't, this has been my experience in my own practice. If you don't make the time to make these strategic planning meetings happen, you will let the fires invade your life. The fires are going nowhere. They will always be there. You might as well let them go for a little bit longer and make sure you're getting this stuff moved forward, because if you aren't paying attention to it, you will never get beyond those fires. So thanks for joining me, Scott. I appreciate your words of wisdom and, sharing the process.
Well, I always say most everyone will be in the same place this time next year. Let's make sure it isn't you. So thanks for having me.
Very true. Awesome. Thanks, Scott. And for those listening, let me know what you thought about the episode. We're trying to get this show out to more people. So if you can, interact positively, a like, a subscribe, or whatever, wherever you're encountering this, or just a smiley face emoji, I'll take it. Let us know what you thought about the show. And I'm always interested in hearing about what's going on in people's practices and things they're implementing. So feel welcome to reach out. Thanks again, Scott.